It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day, listeners, and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. It's episode, I think it's 124 today, mate. Joining me, as usual, my mate, my cousin, in fact, Hong Kong Jack. G'day, mate. How are you?
I'm pretty well.
How are things in Hong Kong? Hot and steamy still? Got the short sleever on?
Yeah, and wet.
Yeah, it's pretty wet around here too.
I did see something funny on the social media early this morning. Someone was asking, because I know Sydney's been quite wet as well.
It has, yeah.
Someone was asking, well, after the 40 days of rain, which plague comes next? Is it the frogs? Or the locusts? And your old mate Duncan McNabb had the perfect response. It's another bike lane.
Yeah, that's not bad. I was in Melbourne on the weekend and nearly got skittled on a bike lane as a pedestrian. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of them actually. And leaving the airport in Sydney, we got into, near enough. You got cyclists getting on the highway, and a very narrow sort of space for them, and it's just looked really dangerous to me. I mean, I'm never going to be picking up the cycle and just go a good 200k for a bit of fun on the weekend, but it just looks incredibly dangerous to be on a cycle. You've got so little protection and you get knocked over. Yes, you're wearing a helmet, but the rest of you is not protected at all. Just a thin layer of lycra between yourself and some very hard, unforgiving surfaces.
Even the kind of minor spills off a bike produce quite a bit of damage.
My old mate Harvey works in the prosthetic business, and of course, he was kept very, very busy from landmines and so forth, left over from the Vietnam War. And I said, well, most of that's gone now, mate. What do where do you get your business from? He said, motorcycle accidents. Basically, that's where a lot of prostheses come from these days. I guess also type 2 diabetes, mate. But anyway, moving on, the productivity roundtable has just commenced as we record this on the 19th of August. Bit of an ambit claim in advance of it, Jack. The ACTU has asked the round table, and they are members of the round table discussion, for a 4-day week. Yeah, you'd have to work a couple extra, wouldn't you?
I would. Be terrible.
Of course, other countries have looked at this. The French, I think, had gone to a 4-day week. And I think that's still in place, isn't it, in France, the 4-day week there?
I think it's about 25 hours a week and 12 weeks annual holidays, I think, currently in France.
Oh, let's go to France. Let's go and live in France, mate.
And that works about as well as you'd expect it to.
Well, it wouldn't. You would think add a lot to productivity. Productivity is such a complex thing, Jack, that working 4 days a week may well result in higher productivity than those working 5. You're obviously fitting your 37 and a half into 4 rather than over 5. And so it's not an idea without merit, but the government fairly quickly jumped on it. Albo said, look, it's lovely to talk about these things, but no. And Jim Chalmers said the government was not working up a policy for a 4-day week. So that's all just been quietly moved aside. What do you expect will happen from this round table? We do love a summit on the Two Jacks, and we've got one, a limited one. But what do you think it will produce? Just
before we leave the 4-day week, I've seen that work really quite well for some people in some circumstances. Yeah. And it really is a case-by-case basis. You know? I mean, it can be...
Well, I think if you've got... I think, and this is one of the things around productivity that we talked about, housing will definitely get a mention in the roundtable. Having said that, I don't think there'll be too many solutions put forward. But if you're working some distance away from your home and you rely on public transport, for example, it might take you 3 hours, possibly 4, as many as 4 hours to get to and from work every day. And if you are working a 4-day week, you're still having to do those things. But that fifth day you don't have to. So, there are issues around that 4-day week that make a bit of sense. Part of the problem you've got is if you've got your workforce living a long distance away from your place of work, then productivity will suffer.
I just give you an example of that. When I was working for a Commonwealth Government tribunal, we had a couple of staff there, not members, staff, who were struggling to buy houses. Had young families struggling to buy houses in Sydney.
Yes.
At that stage, there were bargains to be had down on the escarpment south of Sydney, Coaldale, that sort of area.
Yep.
So they asked and were put on 4-day weeks. And they were quite long days when you consider the train ride from Coaldale, a fairly long one. But it worked superbly. It made their lives kind of livable and got them what they wanted and got the tribunal what it wanted. So this can be done. I just don't think it can be
done across the board.
Done across the board or mandated from on high. It's really got to be done at does this fit our what we're trying to achieve in our organisation?
Well, you've also got working from home arrangements in place, and of course they're being essentially mandated in Victoria at the moment that everyone will have that right to work from home. Obviously, there are some jobs, some vocations where you can't do that.
Bus driving.
Well, yes, you can't do that remotely. Maybe one day.
Well, one day soon you'll be able to do it because you won't have a job.
Yeah. Well, this is just it. I mean, the other precursor to the round table was the Productivity Commission's proposal for a light touch on regulation of AI, and I understand what they're saying. You don't want to tie up AI developments in this country around with a lot of regulation, but at the same time, people are entitled to think that their work, etc., their published work, whether they're publishers or content providers, writers, musicians, etc., can just have their stuff lifted. So that's another thing that's very, very quickly been hand passed into the deep future, Jack. So I gather on all the talk from certainly from Jim Chalmers, is that what this roundtable may achieve, is a bit of a hack away at some of the regulations around employment and work.
If they're serious about doing something about productivity, and they should be, because it's the kind of essence of progress, if you like, essence of progress to a better life for Australians is improved productivity. If they're serious about that, the two obvious areas to attack are regulation and energy costs.
Well, what do you do about energy policy?
You look at the cost of it, the cost right across the board. Are we should be a cheap energy, very competitive country, are we? You've got to start asking the questions. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I've got the answers, but I don't think we're even asking the questions.
Yeah, and look, we are going through a transition to renewables in this country, and we are suffering. A lot of the reason for the high electricity prices has been a lack of investment in the energy sector over a long period of time, while, it must be said, the coalition dithered over energy policy. They really didn't come up with anything workable for a very, very long time. So that is one of the reasons we've had this. There just haven't been the investment into the energy sector that we should have had going back 20 years, Jack.
Yeah.
It may well have been a different energy mix, but we're going through a transition now, which is going to be expensive. It's going to have to link up. There's going to have to be a major investments in infrastructure to get energy from big solar projects, big wind projects into the grid. And those things are going to bite and cause problems. The government sort of assures us that once these things are bedded down, it'll be okay. And I tend to agree with them, because the thing with renewables is you don't have to load a furnace up with something that you've had to extract out of the ground in the first place. But while we go through this transition, we're finding that we're paying, well, energy prices are some of the highest in the world.
Which is making Australia uncompetitive and adversely affecting its productivity. And I think honest questioning and honest answers have to be put on the table about what the future looks like with that. I don't think the current level of government reassurance, this will be fine in the end, is enough. I think we need a more honest discussion than that.
Well, the CSIRO put out their study into energy pricing just a couple of weeks ago. The two cheapest were renewables and coal. And the trouble with coal, Jack, is that there's no private investment going into developing coal-fired electricity generating plants. That's the problem. You can't get a company to invest in it, because they know that within 10 years, that major investment will go south. Within 10 to 20 years.
What they know is the government will tell them to shut it down.
That's not the way it's going. I mean, basically, if you just let it rely on market forces, there's no investment into very little investment into fossil fuels, particularly around coal, for electricity generation. I mean, we do remember, don't we, the coalition government proposal was to basically build and fund electricity generation plants, extend the lives of electricity plants that the companies were walking away from. So that the market is saying no. Anyway, we must move on. But where are those sort of – I often wonder about these, let's cut red tape things. It's always a big thing around elections. Let's cut red tape. What red tape would be looking at cutting here, Jack? Do you have any idea at all?
It's making regular. First of all, it's making regular. Australia's a federation. States run things. There had been quite a lot of easy pickings in just harmonising state regulations, so they're the same across the board. Now, a lot of that work's been done, but there is still more to be done.
Right. So we're talking about some piecemeal tinkering in the end, aren't we, really? Not big ticket items, not big ticket reforms.
Well,
from
yes
the round
no.
table, I mean. The round table.
Yes and no. They're all things that some people will think are small ticket items, but can be big ticket items. There are all sorts of, we ought to be looking at our tax system to say, is our tax system encouraging investment in productive enterprise, or is it not? And at the moment, I would say it's not. I mean, stamp duty is a classic example. There couldn't be a worse tax than stamp duty.
Yeah, and anyone who wants to get into the housing market, there might be some exemptions across the board in certain property purchases, but the amount of stamp duty and state governments have become addicted to it. The amount of stamp duty just for the purchase of a stock standard house is just staggering sort of money.
Yeah, the amount of regulations involved in building even domestic property is absurd, in my view, and it's growing all the time. It's starting to look like the Tax Act, and every bit of that, every page of that, adds to the cost of building anything.
And meanwhile, Jack, we're getting a lot of property that's, that it's not going to be there in 10 years' time. There's a lot of property development that is cheap and nasty.
Yeah, so the regulations don't work.
Yeah, well, there's very little supervision of the regulations. So this is why we're getting houses. There was a townhouse in Western Sydney. It just fell over. It was a year old. And of course, we've had a number of major building projects, multi-storey buildings housing people that have had to be vacated because they didn't come up to standard, because they were going to fall down.
Yeah, I can tell you, we had a look at at a flat in Mascot some years ago with a look to getting an investment property. I had a look at all the documents associated with it, and mercifully I decided that I couldn't tell whether this was a $10 problem or a $500,000 problem, so we didn't buy it. And I think the building's still empty,
Yeah, as I was going to say, there's a hell of a lot of development going on in that part of Sydney at the moment, around sort of Zetland, Alexandria, all the way out to Mascot, on a train line now, Jack. And look, it might be a good place to invest, but there seem to be just so many of these things that are not full at the same time we've got a housing crisis. Perhaps charging two bedroom, 2-bathroom apartments with a car park at $1.4 million, it might be the problem.
There are an awful lot of things that that could be done at a round table, and I think they won't be. And I think the government lacks a bit of courage. We'll probably get on to the current polling, but the Prime Minister's got near record levels of political capital, and if there's anything he's going to spend some political capital on, it ought to be productivity, and I think he won't do it.
Well, we do have an inefficient taxation system. Well, that is certainly that relies on basically pay as you go type taxation rather than sort of the levels of consumption tax. Now, it's not just income tax. It's a problem, as you suggested. Things like stamp duty and other taxes come into the system, and they are inefficient means of gathering revenue. And if you wanted to just start all over again, you would sort of look at consumption taxes, knowing that everyone has to consume, and provide a bit of assistance for low income Australians, and that would be the way you do it basically at the cash register.
Yeah, there's a lot that could be done, but I suspect they won't, and I think the government's just running a bit scared of nothing.
Well, I think, we're going to play into, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, we're going to play into my theory on Anthony Albanese, that Anthony Albanese is kind of like Labor's John Howard. And there might be one or two big ticket items in his career as Prime Minister, but not many. And really it's just about winning elections. And that doesn't mean necessarily that it's good for the country. You could say of John Howard that he brought in reforms. I guess firearms was a bold thing, but also the GST, but not much else after that. And so I think Albo's cut from the same cloth. I think he learned a lot from watching John Howard, Jack.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
This is how you stay in power.
Event, it would be eventually that political capital just dissipates in any event.
It does, yeah. If you don't do anything with it, it'll go.
It just dribbles out the bottom of the jar, right?
Well, we may as well look at the polling that's come out. I mean, it's at the distant end of the electoral cycle here. We just we're in an election year. But Newspoll released its polling yesterday. They have, I think, Labor about 55-45, don't they? Two-party preferred.
Well, the best I saw was 59 two-party preferred. I don't know who.
Well, that was a Resolve poll.
Yeah.
Newspoll had the Libs up from 29 to 30. Labor unchanged at 36, and one added to the One Nation tally. Greens, I think, were staying on 12, and One Nation up to 7. The headline figure for the Newspoll was that Albo's approval ratings have moved into the positive for the first time since The Voice. The Resolve poll really did catch a lot of people's eyes, because that's 59-41. The Coalition still at 29. And the graphic you sent me, I also saw it pop up on X. 1 in 4 women voting for the coalition at this stage, or that's their voting intention for the next election.
Or not voting for the coalition. Sorry,
what did I say? 3 in 4 women will not vote for the coalition. That's what the result poll said.
They're not going to vote for Labor. Most of them, I think, but they're not going to vote for the coalition.
Not going to vote for the coalition, and really, I don't know where you go from there, Jack. For the coalition, I mean, we've largely left them to their own pain, but they are certainly dabbling with the concept of becoming a minor party on those sorts of numbers.
So there's the Prime Minister with a near guarantee of winning the next election, and he walks into a meeting this morning with a chance to go and set a new tone to say we're going to be a country serious about raising productivity because we want to raise the standard of living for all Australians, and he won't do it.
Well, let me explain to you how he would respond in an honest way about that. He would say, well, we just went to an election and we didn't put through big ticket items, big ticket reform items like taxation. We didn't let people know that we were going to do this, so we're not going to do it. We don't want to lose trust with the Australian people. That's the kind of response he would make, in an honest reply. The difficulty we have in our system, Jack, and this goes back to, many elections, but if we go back to the 2019 election where Labor proposed significant reforms, not big tax reforms, but significant reforms in terms of in terms of some taxation, in terms of franking credits, in terms of negative gearing for new housing, and got smashed.
Yeah,
the difference, when they should have won.
The difference is they were trying to win an election. Bill Shorten was trying to win an election. This situation, Albanese's in government, what he could do is say, we're going to come up with a new approach to some taxations, some parts of our taxation system, and we will take it to an election.
Take it to the election. No,
which is what Howard did with the GST. He said, I'm going to take this to the election, right?
And it nearly cost him. It nearly cost him power. You might remember the 98 election. Labor won the two-party preferred, but the coalition were lucky enough to hang on to some out of suburban seats.
But Labor were a lot closer to John Howard's government in the polling than Susan Ley and the Liberals are now.
Sure. Look, I'm not trying to talk it down. What I'm saying is that there's a very fine line between governing in contempt of the people and governing with the support of people. What you suggest is quite right. Here are some big ticket reforms. This is what we're going to go to the people with next time.
And we'll lose some. We're prepared to lose some seats because it's for the good of the country.
Yeah, and that would be fine, except to say, generally speaking, in our election campaigns, if you go, in recent history, in the last 25 years, if you look at anyone who sort of proposed reforms, they either got beaten or nearly beaten.
Yeah, well,
that makes our politicians timid.
Keating was prepared to say to go out there and talk to all the media and talk directly across the media to the people and say some of these things need doing. We need to do them.
Yeah, very different media landscape too, Jack. So in those days, so that's the other problem. If you propose something. And yes, you've got to argue for it. Yes, you've got to say it's going to be positive for the country. Yes, but it will be knocked off. It will be knocked off in the media day in, day out, and that's part of the problem with reform in this country. It's not just a political problem.
So Paul Keating's habit of the late night telephone calls to editors, etc. There are just too many content providers to get the benefits of him yelling down the phone and giving them a serve.
Keating used to go on to talkback radio and take calls from people and get stuck into them too.
Yes,
these things don't happen anymore. I mean, you could say it was.
To be fair, John Howard was like that. He would happily go on the ABC where he knew he was going to get a pasting from Kerry O'Brien, etc., etc. Yeah, if you want to be a good government, you have to go and be prepared to talk to the people who oppose you.
Yeah, okay, all right, we need to move on. Just a big story just developing at the moment. An Israeli MP, his name is Simcha Rothman, has been visa denied from entering Australia, and that decision was made by the Home Affairs Minister, Tony Burke. Mr. Rothman is a member.
Had been granted a visa, I think, and it's been removed.
Yeah, and it's been withdrawn. So Simcha Rothman is a member of the right-wing religious Zionist party. He has made some fairly inflammatory comments around Gaza and around the children of Gaza in particular. But that decision has led to a tit-for-tat. His withdrawal of his visa has led to a tit-for-tat response from the Israeli government, and they have revoked the visas of Australian representatives to the Palestinian Authority and warned of tighter entry restrictions for Australian officials, in a sharp escalation of diplomatic tensions. Both countries are entitled to behave the way they like in terms of their own sovereignty and who comes in and who has to leave. When I look at some of Rothman's comments, Jack, they are pretty inflammatory. But do we just allow that to happen, or has Tony Burke made the right call?
I'm always a bit reluctant to say whether a minister's got this right or wrong without looking at the file or looking at the what's alleged, and I haven't seen that, so I won't. I just think this is kind of business as usual. Of course, the recognition, the decision of the government to say they would recognise Palestinian statehood from the Israeli perspective is going to make them unhappy. And there will be some responses, and Australia will respond in turn. This is just how it works. Like,
any indication that the Israelis are doing the same or similar to the UK or the French, the Canadians, who have all indicated that they will observe a Palestinian state?
The difference is Australia had either been voting for Israel or abstaining for many, many years. None of those other countries, never
did that.
The British Foreign and Commonwealth Office has been pro-Arab and anti-Jew for about 125 years.
All right, more to come then. Jack, this is a big story that's probably not getting the coverage it deserves, but the Australian government failing to deport 100,000 fake asylum seekers. There were 98,979 failed asylum seekers. I'd prefer the term failed to fake, but some of them most certainly will be fake. The failed asylum seekers remain in Australia, up from 68,000 when Labor took office in May 2022, and it's set to pass 100,000 people over the next month or so. And deportations are almost non-existent. There have been fewer than 5 involuntary deportations from Australia for failed asylum seeker claimants, Jack.
This is a sort of a self-feeding problem. Once you get a certain level of a backlog and you get a certain level of delay in processing these kind of claims, you attract more claims. And that's because what I think is 78% of rejected applicants still have full work and study rights.
Oh, I see. Yes.
So that encourages people to make the claim, even if it's got no merit whatsoever, because they know it's going to take 4 years to be dealt with. In the meantime, they can work for 4 years. This is a golden visa for 4 years, even if they end up having to go back. And the longer they're here, the less chance there is of that. But even if they have to go back after 4 years, they will have worked on Australian wages for 4 years and take back a nice tidy little sum.
Well, this is, I mean, I'm not suggesting that these almost 100,000 failed asylum seeker claimants are in this category, but certainly organised crime, ethnic-based crime, like Albanian crime groups, will send people into this country with fake documents. They'll generally be spotted at the border.
But not always.
Generally, because I'm told the passports are so poor, so they might be travelling, let's say, on a fake Greek passport. And once they get picked up, they will make an asylum seeker claim at that time, and that will allow them 4, 5, 6 years in the country until they run the risk of deportation. Although this seems to not be working at the moment, and they will do that, and they will have immigration lawyers, and they will have migrant agents assisting them to get through the process while they basically commit a lot of crime, Jack.
Well, leaving aside the Albanian criminals out of it, but for everybody else, they too will have assistance, but not much assistance is required. All you've got to do is put the form in. It may on its face have very little merit, but it's still got to go through the process.
Won't even turn up at hearings, Jack.
Well, as you know, I used to deal with applications for review for asylum seekers. And even in those days, less than 50% would turn up for a hearing, even when told that without the hearing, the decision would be unfavourable. So, this is not a new problem. The way to deal with the problem well is to make sure that the time for assessment and processing of claims is relatively short. But once you get numbers like 100,000, that timeline blows
becomes
out.
Too big a problem to deal with. Yeah.
So you have to get a little bit creative in how you deal with that.
And on these numbers, it's indicated there'll be another 45,000 by the end of Labor's second term. That will be nearly 150,000.
Yeah. Yeah, which then you'd be looking at 8 years, 6 years plus processing time. So that becomes an easy way to migrate to the country.
Yes, indeed. We also were just Terence Stamp, the wonderful actor.
Just before we leave Australia, the Tasmanian election.
Oh, sorry, I did mean to go. We skipped over. We went into the polling. Yes, of course. Thank you for reminding me.
We were talking about this last week that the current Premier had advised the governor that she should reappoint him, and she did. There was lots of stuff on social media about whether she was right or wrong, and that it would only be a temporary thing, and that he would be turfed out in no time at all. That's not going to happen because the Greens refused to use their 4 or 5 seats to support a Labor motion of no confidence in the Liberal Premier.
Yes.
So he will continue for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, that seems to be the sensible arrangement. It's rare that we describe the Greens as being politically sensible, but they have shown some sense here, because the last thing Tasmanians want is another election.
Yes, and I suspect the Greens were astute enough to, again, not something I often say, were astute enough to say that, look, if we back a no confidence motion and cause a new election, we're going to pay a dreadful price.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like it would bring the collapse of their political system, their state political system, had there been another election this year. So the Greens have smelt the wind there and made essentially the right choice. Now, it may change. They might change their view if they're unhappy with the government, but as it stands, they will not support any motions of any Labor motions of no confidence in the government. And so for the time being, the Tasmanians have some stable government.
Yeah, no, the Greens leader made perfect sense. We do not have confidence in the Liberals, but neither can we have confidence in Dean Winter's Labor. So there you go.
I think that's a reasonable conclusion to draw too. I think Withers has played the cards very badly. Also, we would say that there's a great deal of difference between the Tasmanian Greens, Jack, and let's say the New South Wales Greens. And the Tasmanian Greens.
So the Tasmanian Greens aren't all old communists, you know.
Well, that's exactly right. They tend to be environmentalists and who have cut their teeth in environmental battles in Tasmania over the journey. When you look at the New South Wales Greens, they are almost invariably inner city dwellers who have cut their teeth in local community activism. Completely different.
Yes, and there's the historic connection with Lee Rhiannon, et cetera, the old comms, who were really the foundation of the New South Wales Greens.
Lee Rhiannon. I'm happy to say this. She actually posed as one of the great fighters of in protests against the apartheid regime. We might go back that time when there were sporting tours here, a Springboks rugby tour, etc. And she had she played the role afterwards, many years later, saying she was a champion of all of this, to the point where she actually identified herself as one of the arrested protesters who was someone else. In fact, it was Meredith Bergman's sister. Meredith.
Well, that's right. Both of them were arrested, I think, weren't they?
Yeah, I think the sister grabbed the footy and had a kick. Yeah. And they were both carted off. And Meredith, of course, had to be pardoned by the Parliament before she could take up her position there.
Yeah, and Lee Rhiannon, she'd been sent to Moscow to study the whole thing.
Yeah. Full on Stalinist.
Yeah.
All right, I did mention this briefly, but Terence Stamp, Vale, Terence Stamp, a wonderful actor. He played a baddie like you wouldn't believe, but also did the big change to actors to act Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and which was a huge hit around the world. And I heard someone describing and paying tribute to him yesterday, saying it's just completely different to who he was, and he just embraced the role. So a wonderful actor, dead at 87. Hadn't been seen in public very much.
Was a Sydney lad for a while.
Yes.
By that stage, I used to see him at City Gym, and he, knew him well enough to say good day and all that kind of stuff. By that stage, he must have been well into the 60s. But you could see that in his day, he had been a very beautiful man. He was still a good-looking man for 62 or 63.
He was, I think, announced as the best-looking actor. I know that goes back to the 60s, I think.
He was. Are you old enough to remember Gene Shrimpton causing a kerfuffle at the Melbourne Cup?
Well, I know of it, yeah.
Yeah, the model. He was the boyfriend who was brought over from London.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And they were indeed a beautiful couple. But he was an incredibly good-looking man and a really nice 62 or 63-year-old. But you could still see that he had been that good-looking.
Yeah, and look, a wonderful actor too. So
great actor.
Vale, Terence Stamp, dead at 87. Moving now, Jack, into the Ukrainian-Russian peace talks. We had the Alaska talks on the weekend. I was sitting around in a hotel room watching the speeches thereafter. It was a failed exercise. There were no agreements made. Since then, Vladimir Zelensky has appeared in the Oval Office, not dressed down this time, and there was a bit of a charm offensive extended towards him, from what I can gather.
Well, not just Zelensky. Every other world leader of note was in there, I think, weren't there?
Well, yes, there were thanks extended to I think Keir Starmer was there.
Keir Starmer was there. Emmanuel Macron was there. Giorgia Meloni was there. Anthony Albanese didn't get a gig. But
people were saying, Trump likes Meloni, but he doesn't. Merz was there. It's he's head of the
German Chancellor.
Yeah. So there was a bit of a charm offensive. Zelensky, the journalist who impertinently asked him, why do you want a suit today? Zelensky turned around and said, "I see you wearing the same suit you were back in February." And Trump roared with laughter. You often get a smile from Trump, but you don't get laughter. Look, all of that aside, the Alaskan talks were, a disaster. Clearly, Putin and Trump came away with no agreement on anything. They said they were close in certain areas, or they were of one mind in certain areas, but there were a couple of stumbling blocks, and various sort of social aspects of the meet, including a lunch, were cancelled. Trump returned home to basically spin it in local media, and Putin flew home to Moscow. So we don't. The problem is we don't know what the stumbling blocks are. But Trump was trying to urge Putin into a ceasefire, and then after that all fell apart, he's now saying we don't want a ceasefire. We basically want an agreement, a peace agreement. So that's where we are.
Yeah.
Well, he's walked away from the ceasefire concept, and there doesn't. I think we might be sort of dealing with semantics largely, but
well, I would have thought it's a distinction with that much difference. I didn't expect the Alaska talks to produce anything much apart from kind of setting the groundwork for a broader consultation, which is what's happening now. And
terrible optics, though, Jack. Terrible optics. Terrible optics. I mean, why hold peace talks on American soil in Alaska, which most Russians think should be theirs anyway?
Yeah, I don't.
And then you saw photographs of American military having to roll out the red carpet and tape it down to the floor and all this sort of stuff, leading all the way to the Russian aeroplane.
Yeah,
not good, mate. Not good.
I don't get excited about. I don't get excited about that one way or the other.
Well, Marco Rubio in 2022 says you can't deal with this guy. You can't have an agreement with him. Because he's a liar, and he will. It doesn't matter whether he signs an agreement or not. It's not worth the paper it's written on. Now he's saying, "Oh no, we need to have an agreement." So how do you have an agreement with Vladimir Putin?
I think they're going to have to.
Yeah, but it's not going to be worth the paper it's written on, because Putin will just sort himself out. And Putin has grand plans of re-establishing the former Soviet republics across Eastern Europe. That's the plan. We know that that's the case. We also know that Russia has a very, very weak economy, unemployment in the 20s, GDP going backwards, around about 10% in the last 2 years. They are vulnerable economically, and no one has actually in the Trump administration has said, well, let's play the economic card. Let's really crush them with sanctions. I mean, Trump has mentioned it, but it's never been on the table.
Yeah, well, this is how I see it. I think the Ukrainians, the latest polling out of Ukraine is that the support for a negotiated end is up from 25% to nearly 70%, and the belief that that Ukraine will join NATO is down from 64 to 32.
Well, it's a war-torn country that's been belted day in, day out. With an invasion, we don't have to call it illegal. It is illegal by nature.
Yeah.
And it can, they continue to fire rockets at civilian places. Those people are sick and tired of the loss, of the death around them. They would like to return to their normal lives. So I understand that.
So, but just let me finish. Whatever, yes, the invasion's illegal, but it's succeeded to this extent that Russia now holds all of Crimea and most of Donbass, and we're at a stalemate. That is that the front lines is just not shifting more than a few metres at a time.
It's shifting, but it is shifting Russia's way.
Perhaps
but a little bit faster than you thought. than you suggest.
But the prospects of Ukraine regaining Crimea and Donbass are almost non-existent in my view. And then that means...
So what are we looking at? Latter-day annexation of Czechoslovakia? I mean, does anyone seriously think that Putin will stop there?
Well, we have to make a choice as to what we do next. And the choice isn't about... Putin's not a moral man. So the idea that you could use international law and arguments of moral force with him is ridiculous. I mean, it will have no effect on him whatsoever. Their economy isn't good, but this is Russia. They're a huge country and they can survive a bad economy for a long time and will be prepared to. And he will be prepared to, and enough Russians will agree with it. They're selling enough oil to China and India, etc., to keep going.
Relying more and more on North Korea in terms of military force and also military infrastructure. So that tells you that they're in a bit of strife. And I just think, it's not so much gun at the head stuff, but, we will basically make your economy really, really struggle to the point where you will have to sue for peace. I mean, I just don't know why Putin has been excluded from a serious threat to his economy, because that's the thing that will bring him undone. Enough people in Russia hitting the streets saying we don't have enough food to eat, our economy's in turmoil, we've got hyperinflation, and he can turn around and say, well, it's all the West doing this, and they'll say, yeah, okay, fine, but we want to stop to this. That's when you get to regime change.
Well, so, if your solution to the Ukrainian problem is bringing down the Russian regime, then we better put our seatbelt on and get ready for a long war.
We're going to get ready for a long war anyway, mate, because what you're doing is actually, what you're suggesting is that you legitimise an invasion of a country, a civilian, an attack on civilians, a military attack on civilians. And where does it all end? Knowing that Putin's ambitions are to establish the former, the boundaries of the former Soviet Union, more or less. This is just the beginning as far as Vladimir Putin's concerned. Well, the annexation of Crimea was the first step. But what happens to Moldova? What happens to Latvia? What happens to Estonia? What happens to Lithuania?
Well, then you're going to have to get out there and find some support somewhere around the world to change the Russian regime, and it's just not there.
Trump actually mentioned these things. We were going, in one of his angry moments about Putin, he said, we will bring in new sanctions that will bring him to heel.
Well, I doubt they will.
None of that's ever been seriously countenanced.
Yeah, I don't think it will, and I don't think the will of the Western world will be there to do it. Will the Germans find somewhere else to get their gas? I don't think so.
Well, these are the same arguments that were put around Hitler in Germany as he expanded his control, and he couldn't believe his luck that the West would bend over so quickly, allow him to annex Czechoslovakia, and now allow him to move into Austria with Anschluss, and slowly but surely, he actually thought he could take Poland. And no one would care, and that was the trigger for World War II, of course.
Well, you have to get ready to be around for a while.
At some stage, you've got to draw a line with this guy, and I'm not blaming Trump as much as I blame some of his predecessors, who were not hard enough with him over the annexation of Crimea.
No, they weren't hard at all.
No, well, sanctions, but you bring the economy to the heel, you bring disruption into Russian society, you put people on the streets, and then you get into that sort of totalitarian cycle where you do get regime change, or there is a prospect of regime change. That's sort of none of these things have been counted.
Okay, well,
all right. Moving on. We got some. We did talk about this last week. Trump's inflation numbers are starting to look a little bit scary. They're not off the charts just yet, but last Friday, the wholesale inflation, US wholesale inflation rate was released for the month of July. That is the supplier's cost of goods and services, up by 0.9%. Doesn't sound like very much. The forecast was 0.2%, by the way, but 0.9% annualised is well over 10%. So these things, we have seen a lot of companies absorb tariffs, absorb those costs to the point where I think General Motors took a $1.1 billion blow to the bottom line, but those things can't be sustained over a period of time. The baseline inflation rate in the United States is 2.9%, which is higher than it was, but only marginally higher than it was since last year's presidential election. That wholesale inflation rate is looking pretty nasty. There are things that are keeping inflation down in the United States. One is the price of gas, and when I say gas, I mean petrol, which is down, I think, 80 cents per gallon for the national average than it was at this time last year. So there has been a little bit of respite there because essentially the global price of oil has gone from like a high of nearly $90 a barrel to around about 62 at the moment, very low. But again, if there's no real resolution in Ukraine, Jack, then there is a prospect that price will rise. US domestic production of oil is pretty much at an all-time high. So those things that particularly is keeping the inflation figures down. But the overall thing, US consumer goods, about 14% of all US consumption relies on imports, is from imports. It's a little bit deceptive because they're, given global manufacturing and all that sort of stuff, it's probably a good deal higher than that. But around 14% of consumer goods are imported directly into the United States, and Americans will be paying 10% minimum on that. But because most of the goods coming into the United States are coming from China, it will be 30% plus. So these we just keep telling our listeners, you've really just got to look at the economic indicators in the United States. Inflation isn't taking off yet, but there are some signs that it might. And also, if those things do bite pretty hard, it's going to be difficult for anyone in the Trump administration to explain how pretty much every other country around the world has controlled inflation, but the US hasn't. And the only reason for that is this tariff policy.
Well, the economy is nearly always the most important electoral factor.
Yeah, very, very slow growth there at the moment. And the part of the problem, Jack, is that there's no one, unlike his first term, there's no one in the Trump administration to say no or hang on. So Trump has this kind of, and I don't think it's a deliberate thing. We know he's a pretty routine liar, but I actually think he's got a lot of people saying, no, the economy's going great. And you hear him say, the economy's going great. And prices are down and petrol's down. And in the case of petrol, gas is down. And that's because we drill, baby, drill. But the price of those things, like gas, where people have to purchase them regularly, are rising, and particularly around food. And it will be difficult to sustain, and it will look like he is a long way away from reality more and more. Again, they're not in dire straits at the moment, but some of these signs, particularly that one in July, would indicate that inflation may get out of control in the United States. Trump and others have been urging the Fed to drop interest rates. That's probably not going to happen on these inflation figures. And not with the current chair of the Fed anyway. He's going to stick to his guns. So yeah, it's going to be the economy that causes Trump the biggest problems. As with any political leader, he can't escape that. He can't.
Well, you can never escape. You can never escape the economy.
No,
There are some things you can smooth over, and we'll have to see how it goes.
Yeah, look, we did a little bit on crime stats, of course. Trump moving not troops, but enforcement into federal enforcement agents onto the streets of DC. Looked pretty messy, Jack, but it forced the Democrats to sort of turn around and say, well, crime's not as bad in DC as it used to be, which is kind of a bit of a broken argument, isn't it?
Yeah. They're at at the moment the Dems seem to look at whatever Trump said last and say we'll take the opposite position, and then they end up looking like, well, we're okay about the crime levels in DC, which is just a losing position.
Yeah, that's right. So it becomes it's an unsustainable argument, and really, I think, if things do go badly for Trump, we might see more of this. Federal troops in New York, there are already federal troops in Southern California. Have you had a look? I must say, if you had a look at Gavin Newsom's exchanges on social media with Trump, well, they're not exchanges. He's got a communications person who
Newsom comms, they're called.
Yeah, they're very funny. He puts out very much Trump-like social media messages. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Your favourite governor, Gavin Newsom, all this sort of stuff, which is straight out of the playbook. And we should have a look. So we did last week. Newsom is saying, well, if you take if you create 5 additional congressional seats, House seats in Texas, we'll take 5 here. I guess the question is he backing himself for a run, Jack? Is Gavin Newsom having a run at the presidency? Get through the midterms and see how you go from there.
I think he probably is. As we've said before, I think his problem is he's from California.
Well, Jack, California in April of this year was announced the 4th largest economy in the world, with only 3 above him. That's Germany, the United States, and China. And guess California was growing faster than the aforementioned 3 above him. So even growing faster than China.
That's how you see it. I don't think it's how the voters who are going to determine a presidential election will see California.
Well, that's what California is. It has a bigger economy than France. Forget about the UK. It passed them years ago. And it is growing. Yes, you've got problems with crime and all these sorts of things. But, yeah, I mean, yes, there are always issues with Democrats who are either from New England, Massachusetts Democrats or Californian Democrats. And there is always that disconnect or possible disconnect between them and those in the Midwest where perhaps elections are won. But I see himself setting himself up for a good result in the midterms, and then possibly putting himself forward for the presidential, for the Democratic candidacy for the presidency in 2028.
I suspect that would rather delight Republicans, but still.
Yeah, look, it might. It may well. God only knows how things are working in that country. Very, very divided place at the moment. I really like this story, Jack, that you put forward. Drone manufacturing in the United States has just fallen off the charts. Well, not fallen off the charts. It never really was on the charts. The US military trails the Russians and Chinese in drone manufacturing. The US is behind in developing drone technology, while the conflicts in Ukraine and Israel are dominated by swarms of inexpensive drones that are largely produced with components from China. One Chinese company, DJI, accounts for 70% of all worldwide drone sales, and they make millions of drones a year.
Which brings me to
That's the state of warfare, right? That is the state of warfare now.
Which brings me to Australia. What are we doing?
Oh, well, I mean, we are probably, I don't know what the military investment is in drones. There was some statements made in terms of desirable purchases recently. I mean, Australia's defence requirements are not complicated. We need medium to long range missiles. We need submarines. We need aircraft with significant attack value, and then we need drones. And I think of all of those, we've probably got one.
Plus we need a surface navy as well.
Look, absolutely, and I know that there's been a decision to make, I think, build 2 new frigates, and that's all fine, but these things can be taken out of the water with robots, mate, with robots on a power back, as we've learned from Ukraine. So the future of military acquisitions is really about robotics and drones. Yeah, it's a good point. What's Australia doing? But the Americans are miles behind, and they talk basically about Chinese sort of networks of drone attacks that are just inescapable. So, we're talking about the US economy. It's still the largest in the world, but China is catching up, and China is catching up in military capability too by sheer force of technology. You've got a piece in here about congressional stock trading, Jack. It's always a bit iffy.
It's been a perennial source of contention in the US that people in Congress get quite rich and they're allowed to trade kind of willy-nilly, and that means when they get access to information which is going to affect stock prices, they just jump on it, right?
And they've got there have been a number have been charged with insider trading, but they're essentially privy to government information on and how they deal with certain companies before the market is.
And this is not a party political thing. No. This is across the board.
You don't see too many broke Congress men and women, do you? None of them are living off the bones of their asses.
No, they're paid. Their pay's okay.
It's modest, it's modest even by Australian standards and UK, etc. It's modest.
Yes, well, the UK is even worse, I think. But yeah, their pay's quite modest, and they generally end up quite rich. So this is, there are very few who don't trade in stocks. But this comment really struck me. This is a commentator saying, well, this is okay. Markets get better the more information participants have. So instead of banning congressional stock trading, we should force Pelosi, who's the current whipping person for stock trading, to automatically broadcast her trades in real time, so that if she's got access to information and acts on it, everybody else should know as well.
I think Marjorie Taylor Greene has been on the spotlight, under the spotlight too, for share purchases that clearly involved insider trading.
Yes,
and
Nancy Pelosi says it's her husband who does the trading and she has nothing to do with it. I don't know what the answer to that is, but their stock picking record puts them probably a little bit better than Warren Buffett. So someone's going okay at it,
and he does pretty well. So is the answer a ban? It should be, really. Well, you're not allowed to get away with this stuff in Australia.
No,
Peter Dutton was called out for it around the time of the pandemic? The announcement around the pandemic. Bought himself up a whole heap of shares and stocks that went through the roof. They had gone into decline, and he bought them at a cheap price, and they went back up after a single policy announcement. So it doesn't look good.
Well, a ban is attractive, but this sort of struck me. This is not a bad idea either. Just make sure that the moment the transaction goes through, the whole world knows about it.
Yeah, so it's a little bit like they work with political donations these days, in real-time announcements.
Yes. Don't tell me in 6 months' time. Tell me the day the check lands.
All right, there's another notion here, Trump and picking winners. The reference point here is that the Trump administration is in talks with Intel, the microchip manufacturing company, because they're in a bit of strife, Jack. They're being a bit overwhelmed by manufacturing elsewhere, particularly in Taiwan.
And they've made a few poor decisions,
and made some very poor strategic decisions. Absolutely right. And the US government is now sort of looking to take a stake in Intel and help support the company's effort to expand domestic manufacturing. Part of the Trump push to expand the American manufacturing base. In any other world, Jack, you call that socialism, don't you?
Yeah, well, or picking winners, and it's not something I think is a good idea. Just because I think governments tend not to be very good at picking winners.
Exactly right. If you've got companies, there's probably the best examination of this is the company Motorola, which held significant market share in mobile phones for a long period of time, made some very, very poor strategic choices on where they were going to go, while Apple and Samsung and others went a completely different way and were pushing smartphones and these sorts of things, and they just got overwhelmed. Now, if you're going to back a company like Motorola, in this case Intel, you're backing a loser. That's the problem.
Yeah, I can still recall. I think it was, I can't remember who the Australian government was, although I think the then Senator John Button was involved, so it must have been Labor. Didn't we keep Kodak going for quite a while there?
There is a good piece in the Australian today about in the op-eds about backing your Kodaks. Kodak is the sort of whipping boy for really bad strategic investment.
But they had a nice big factory up in Preston or somewhere, and smack bang in the middle of a good seat. But I got an idea the Australian government kept Kodak afloat for quite a few years beyond any common sense approach to it.
Yeah, the writing was easy in hindsight, of course. I'm just looking for this piece because it was actually quite clever, and I can't find it in the commentary. But one more time, no. But yeah, Kodak is the sort of whipping boy for investing in really obsolete technology. Who'd have thought digital photography would take hold? Well, Kodak stuck almost in a slavish way to print development and so forth. They just didn't keep up. Motorola's another one.
Well, Kodak made choices not to go down the digital route, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't just they didn't know about it.
When they decided to go down the digital route, it was too late. Yeah. Yes. Government's not very good at doing those things because they will, as you say, Jack, is sort of intimated, they will make decisions based on a short-term political need. It might be we don't want a factory to close down in a
marginal seat.
In a marginal seat that's based in a marginal seat.
This is not a good way of measuring what's a good investment.
Yeah. All right.
And that's true whether it's the Republicans doing it in the United States or Labor doing it in Australia. It's not a good idea.
Yes, indeed. Look, we did want to explore just a little bit on this sort of disconnect in perceptions across class and education lines around crime. We could make the same comments around, Jack's put this up around the states and around federal police going or law enforcement moving into DC. And there is this sort of disconnect between the way the middle class see these things and the way the working class see them.
And it's the use of stats. So in the UK, there is an argument in London about how bad the crime figures are in London, for instance, and how bad immigration is in certain areas. And invariably, for the university-educated people jump on in the media and say, well, the stats show that it's really quite okay.
Yeah.
Which is what happens in DC. And unfortunately, the people at the bottom end of the economic ladder, the working people, say, no, it's not. You come and try living where we live, and you'll find that it's really terrible. This is a problem when you get that kind of disconnect, I think.
Well, it's a sort of almost endless battle between anecdotal and data-based statistics. So the people can look at the data and say, well, it's actually pretty good. But if someone's just been mugged the previous day, is going to have a completely different view on crime.
This played out on CNN and MSNBC on the DC crime figures, because all of those companies have big bureaus in Washington DC, and so their leading talking heads were going, well, look, the crime figures are pretty good. And the person who's hosting the show saying, well, they're not. I don't know about the figures, but, my assistant got mugged yesterday, and so it just doesn't wash, and the people don't quite believe it. But there is a danger, I think, when you get that kind of consistent disconnect between, the normal people and the community leaders, if you like.
Yeah, true, but it's worthwhile. It's worthwhile examining. I mean, look, if we look at violent offending in Australia, for example, there is no higher point than in the 1920s. Never been.
Immediately post First World War One.
Exactly right, and I guess you could throw in the pandemic around it. So incredible levels of violent crime and property crime during that period. The next sort of challenger to that is the 80s with the rise of heroin coming into Australia. There's a lot of property crime, a lot of violent crime. And really, when we look at our murder rates and violent offending rates, they've been pretty much on the down slope ever since. But if you try to explain that to someone in Melbourne who's just been the victim of an aggravated burglary, you're going to get a complete, hang on just a minute, crime's pretty good in Melbourne. And it is. Well, although there is a spike in just that one offence, aggravated burglaries. There's a big spike in it. Everything's okay data-wise around crime and property crime, and perhaps more theft from vehicles and things like that. But then you get this big spike in aggravated burglaries and associated crimes like abductions. So data actually does represent it, but data is actually, and you've got to look at data. You can't ignore it in terms of how you set policy and policing and all that sort of stuff. But it's really hard to explain the difference in the data and the perception of someone who's just been a victim of crime. All right, I'd love to have that conversation a bit longer and how we sort of prevent crime. And we're not very good at it in Australia, but there are a couple of examples in recent history that were very, very good and led to some really good outcomes in terms of how we treat people who are in prison and how we treat them when they're released. The Bracks government had plenty to pat itself on the back about. Didn't like to talk about it too much because there's no value, no votes in votes in prison reform. But they had some very good programs that were actually reducing recidivism and therefore the social cost of crime significantly. And then there was a change of government and all got the arse. So yeah, we might put that aside for a chat over the next week or two. Sports, Jack. Well, the big story in the AFL is, and I believe the AFL will move on this today, on Tuesday, the 19th of August, is that Rankin, the Crows, what you call him, a small forward, perhaps he's a little bit bigger than that, has apparently referred to a Collingwood player as a faggot, and he's sort of throwing his hands up now. What's he looking at getting, Jack? I mean, I can just give you a bit of context. Last year, Jeremy Finlayson was banned for 3 games. He was also apologetic. Gold Coast Will Powell was suspended for 5 matches. I think he self-reported. West Coast Jack Graham He got four games after he admitted to a homophobic slur against a Giants opponent. So Rankine hasn't self-reported, so one would think it's got to be a significant penalty.
Yes, given that the Crows have got one more home and away game and then two finals.
Potentially, well, they'll win. Let's say they win their first home final, then they go into a prelim, and then so they could have as few as three finals, to play in the grand final.
But we'll get at least two.
Well, all these others, mate. Finlayson 3, Powell 5, Jack Graham 4, Lance Collard 6-game ban and in the VFL level. And Sydney draftee Riak Andrew given a 5-match suspension in July for a highly offensive slur in a VFL match. And Collingwood backman and vice captain Braden Maynard said, Jack, it's happened too often now. It's happened, 3 or 4 times now, so we clearly need to stamp it out, and I think we're doing a great job at that. I think we're doing as best as we can to stamp all that stuff out of the game. So, yeah, it's not good to see, and I think we're doing everything we can, both from a women's program and a men's program, to stamp it out. This could determine the premiership, Jack.
It could. I asked a couple of people younger than me, because I'm sort of, and probably you are too, we carry a few of the scars of having played a bit of footy and stuff in days when anything could be said.
Yeah.
And you can't unwind that in your history. But the younger people just kept telling me, no, if it's 3 weeks, 5 weeks, I don't care. It's got to go.
It's got to go. I have to say too, if you speak to a gay male, the faggot epithet makes them not well. I guess they'll have different emotional responses, but it is pretty much the worst thing you can say. So it's a term that clearly needs to be cut out of sport.
It's not even a term that they use playfully with each other.
No, it's a bad word, and so yes, it's ugly and it needs to be removed from the game.
I mean the P word they spray backwards and forwards to each other pretty freely, but at least some of the ones
there's
that I know.
There's something deeply unpleasant about it. I remember talking to a gay colleague at the Australian at the time, and it was over it was around the same-sex. What do we call it? It was almost like a telephone poll, but a postal vote, if you like. And he said, I just got called a faggot for the first time in 15 years. He couldn't quite believe it. And he's very hurt, very upset about it. So we need to get rid of it. And look, it may well be that Rankine was looking at, because he didn't self-report, a lot of these guys did and still got 3-4 weeks. He's got to be looking at minimum 4 weeks. I did see Lee Matthews and the Gold Coast Suns coach. They both spoke last night on a footy show saying, well, what about a 2 or 3 week ban and a $50,000 fine or something of that order?
I'd have no objection to that myself, but, I mean...
Yeah, you really got to listen to the current players and say, well, it is what it is, and we're going to get rid of it.
And I think the AFL needs to spend a bit of time over the summer getting the way they deal with this stuff, getting all the ducks in a row so there's a bit of consistency about it, because it's been a bit of a dog's breakfast this year. Yeah. And they need to sort that out.
Well, it would be hideous if Rankine was given 2 weeks. It just wouldn't make any sense.
No.
So they need to have some sort of consistency about it. And you're right, it's probably one of the end of season things. But highly talented forward, been in good nick, and with the 3 big tours that got at the Crows, he'd have plenty of work and in the finals. But it doesn't look like he'll be playing them, and that could change the entire mix around the finals.
Yeah, well, there are other good small forwards. Hasn't played for weeks and weeks and weeks, Josh Rochelle. So
Yeah, so look, they look the side to beat. They're on top of the ladder now. They look the side to beat. They beat Collingwood.
Yeah,
Collingwood a little bit stiff umpiring wise. I know they did bleed about it, but
well, they're allowed to bleed. But
a couple of non-decisions. It went sort of Adelaide's way, I suppose.
And there was
late in the game.
There was a throw that even the bloke.
Well, that was one of them. Yeah.
The bloke who was the beneficiary of the throw and caught
a bit of a boast about it.
But he said that as he was putting it through, he thought, "Oh, that's going to get called back."
It looked bad at the time, but he at least
part of that is 4 umpires. The 4 umpires thing just doesn't work.
Not working. And you see a lot of them. Maybe it's because there's too many on the field. They get in bad positions.
Yes,
and they can actually get caught in the play. And it's part of the controversy about players making contact with umpires. But the umpires
so over the summer, get rid of the 4 umpires.
At this stage, we've got a round to go. Adelaide and Geelong look as good as anyone, and I gather no one wants to play the Western Bulldogs in a final. That'd be the way I'd put it.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, look, I think it's very open, to be quite honest. There isn't much. I mean, you'd say Collingwood are probably, they look like they're gone, but they were terrific on Friday night. It was a cracking game of football.
Yeah, well, they had to respond, but they've got some issues around the midfield, Jack. Just not quick enough around, getting the ball down. They've got a sort of part-time ruckman who has been very, very good for them, but they are getting belted in clearance and, in the last month or so.
What I really liked about them, which I hadn't seen for a long time, was the kicking the crazy balls into the forward line in the first quarter, the ones that were sort of horizontal punts and all sorts of things, just to try and break down so the Crows marking forwards couldn't mark the ball. They were deliberately kind of putting them off the side of the boot, anything but a straightforward drop punt.
Adelaide Crows do have a very, very powerful forward line. You think 3 are too many. Generally speaking, that's the rule, isn't it? 3 tall's too many, but 1's too many. But it's working for them. It's right at the moment.
Hawthorn played 4 last week.
NRL, Melbourne beat the Panthers. They've got a magnificent round of footy coming up here. I think Melbourne play the Bulldogs this weekend. Canberra Raiders still on top. They play the Panthers. And the Roosters are coming along nicely there too. I think they'd expect to get a win as well on the weekend. So the Panthers look like they will remain 5th unless they can get a win against, the Raiders. And Melbourne and the Bulldogs are at Melbourne. Might set the Bulldogs back a little bit there too, but plenty going on in the NRL. In cricket, the great Australian coach and player, Bobby Simpson, passed away over the weekend. I did read, I was looking forward to the Alan Border tribute. I don't know if you read that one, Jack, and that was, the piece I read, it was Alan Border, Mark Taylor and David Boone all offering their respects to Bob Simpson. Border said that he liked, that he sought out the advice of Ian Chappell when he was captain. Of course, Border was captain of Australia for about 80 games, I think, 80 tests. And that it was clear that Bobby Simpson and Ian Chappell didn't get on. So I think Simpson was always a sort of fairly cantankerous sort of fellow, but he had the deep respect for the players.
As Chappell can be as well.
Chappell can be as well. But he certainly improved Australia's fielding stocks at a time when it was just absolutely essential.
I
fielding dropped right off.
I saw Mark Taylor saying that Bob Simpson thought that if you were the best fielding team in the world, you're probably going to be the best test team.
It's probably about right.
And he set out to improve that, and Australia's fielding had not been good.
No, it was poor. He was a wonderful slipper himself, of course. In fact, in that Border tribute, he talked about slip field training, where where Simpson had these soft hands and he was grabbing balls at 60, 65 years of age and still very competent. Could have easily slipped into the slip scored for Australia at that age. Of course, came back during the Packer cricket revolution and captained Australia after a long spell. Not spell from the game, but a spell from the game at the top level. He was still playing. Cricket, I think, for Canterbury on the weekends. Yeah,
a very prickly character, but made a great contribution.
Yeah, I applauded Graham Leach, who's now retired from the Australian, for his eulogies, which was, he'd written a number of years ago. They sit in the bank waiting for someone to die, waiting for that person to die. And I applauded him for it, for avoiding using the prickly character assessment, Jack. And Gideon Hay wrote a lovely little tribute as well. And of course, tonight or this afternoon, Australia will play South Africa in the first of the 3 ODI series. The first game in Cairns and the next 2 in the South African Test captain Bavuma is playing in the one-day side, and Mitch Marsh is captain of the Australian side. And I looked at the probable 11, and Glenn Maxwell's not playing, but of course he's retired, hasn't he, from one-day cricket? And I was looking at it going, why is he not playing? And then I look at that side and think, gee whiz, you put Tim David in there at 6. There's no reason why Tim David shouldn't be playing 50-over cricket. That's my view. And anyone who can hit 100 off 30 balls, you want him in your side. Anyway, we'll see how they get on today in Cairns. The Wallabies, Jack, broke, was it a 32-year drought at Johannesburg?
60. 1963, they last won in Johannesburg.
And it looked like they were going to get beaten by 100 points at one point there, and really did fire up. They've got some real talent. There's plenty to look forward to there.
Yeah, not just the talent. That's and young talent at that. But they play a really, really good style of rugby now. And I don't know whether you saw it. James O'Connor, the much troubled young man,
yes,
was back in the side, and he was absolutely terrific. And if you can find it on the highlights, have a look at it. I think the score was 26-22, so a game in the balance. And he's playing in the 10 shirt, calls for the ball from the base of a ruck. Yeah, the 20-year-old Max Jorgensen's over on the sideline, and he's got his hand in the air as well. And there was a pass from O'Connor that cut out 2 players, landed on Jorgensen, and it was a try from inside their own half. It was just a thing of beauty, and very gutsy play. Yeah,
from the Brumbies player, who's just a ripper. He's a fantastic player. Just very briefly, the Allianz Stadium, brand spanking new. And there was a bit of concern raised during the women's state of origin in the rugby league. They were basically playing a swimming pool. And since then, a study has been undertaken, which means the Allianz Stadium, adjacent to the Sydney Cricket Ground, beautiful new 40,000-seat stadium, has been, the playing surface is not good enough. They've put too much clay in it or whatever it is. And so after the first week of the NRL final series, the stadium will be closed. Not likely that it would have been used anyway, with who's making up the 8 in the NRL. And it'll be closed for 7 or 8 weeks while they resurface the ground. There's a plumbing company I know who got the contract. And I think the phone call would have come from a New South Wales minister saying, this is on you. You have to pay for all of this. And Chris Minns has since said, we're not paying for any of this. You fix it up. But here's the thing that staggered me, Jack. A modern stadium is expected to be able to drain 600 millilitres of water per hour. Now, that's like 2 feet of rain. it can get rid of in an hour. It turns out the Allianz Stadium can only do 40.
Yeah.
4 inches. 4 centimetres, sorry.
You and I were both watching a game from Princes Park. What's it called now? Icon Park in Melbourne, an AFLW game. And I texted you because we've both seen a lot of footy at Princes Park, and it was almost unrecognisable because the ground looked like carpet. I've never seen a Princes Park look like that.
I'm not even sure that. I think they still have a turf wicket there, but I may be wrong. I'd have to look because of course Carlton Cricket Club played there, and I think still do. So I doubt they'd have a drop in. But yeah, it looked perfect, didn't it? And watching the Carlton Collingwood game, this is in the women's. Jack and I were both watching it from our respective spots around the world, and noticed a real pickup in some of the standards, particularly the length and accuracy of kicking, and so yes, the women's thing is. I think it's. I think they're starting to get a certain thing right. A lot of the players who came in, they just weren't natural footballers. So it takes a while, it takes a while to get there.
And they'd all had a situation where they might have played until they were 12 or 13, then stopped playing.
Play
and then
basketball, play soccer,
Yeah, and then came back in later. I've got to say, I think the best thing the AFLW are doing is playing at grounds like North Sydney Oval and Icon Park, where it's a good-sized ground, and it's a terrific. You get a great atmosphere. There's nothing worse than trying to take one of those games to Marvel, where you're going to get 10,000 people or 15,000 people, and it looks empty.
Or play at the oblong at Geelong, which is I think 210 metres long. Might be a little bit shorter now, but with some of the development of the ground, I mean, it's just if you watch footy at Geelong, the first thing you notice is how many times the ball's kicked out in the full, and that's because it's a very, very narrow ground. All right, well, take us out, Jack. I think we've got something to do with Vegas, haven't we?
Have you been to Vegas?
Yeah, been to Vegas. I went to Vegas during the transition period between the mob controlling it and corporate America controlling it, which it does now. Yeah,
well, their visitor numbers are really well down. And this seems to have been a choice they've made. I keep seeing reports of this and reports from people I know who've been there. It's $90 US for a round of drinks. The days when
hotels were always cheap, and they probably still are compared to the rest of the United States because it's subsidised by gambling.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that's true anymore. There was a credible report a couple of days ago of a chap who's staying in his Vegas hotel, and he wanted to take the stuff out of the minibar and put his own beers and things in there, and they told him that it's a $50 a day charge to use the minibar to store your own stuff in it, right? So they seem to have...
Yeah.
They seem to have made a conscious choice to try and milk everything, and so they're no longer looking for the volume of gamblers to come through and provide
So the gambling revenues aren't there, I suppose.
I guess that's it. Yeah.
And you also got to say, I mean, if you order room service in some of these vast hotels, I mean, as they used to say, you'll get it in a couple of days.
Yeah.
So those things, look. Once you've been to Vegas, I guarantee you never want to go back.
Yeah, I've got friends who go a bit, And, there you go.
Yeah.
Anyway, just one more thing. We have our own version of Feather and Bone here in Hong Kong, and people like these corporate team bonding activities, and even food shops are getting into the corporate activities. They send a whole lot of people there and they learn to make pasta or something like that. And this is supposed to make them all better workers when they get back to the office. But I like the one from around the corner here, the local Feather and Bones got classes in making beef Wellington.
Beef Wellington. Well, You're going to get your mushrooms from somewhere. Yeah, it's a fabulous 70s dish, but it's not going to be a thing in Australia for a very, very long time. All right, folks, that takes us out for today, the Two Jacks episode 124, and we want to thank you for listening, and also ask you to drop us a line if you feel the need. And let us know any comments, criticisms, questions you may have to ask us. We have thick skins. We've been around this caper for a long time, and we have thick skins, so you can go as hard as you like. And, we won't even do it because you know how to get hold of us at any given time. There's the Conditional Release Program email. There's Jack's, what do you call it? The
Substack.
Yep, Substack, and there's me on.
If you can't find us, you're not fair dinkum.
Yeah, that's right. So we'll leave a little bit of mystery to it, but you can hit me up on X as well. My DMs are always open, and that takes us out. So thanks, and we look forward to speaking with you next week. See you guys.